In a quiet corner of the Bamboo Grove Hermitage, Ananda and the Buddha were sitting under an ancient Bodhi tree. The early morning sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting soft patches of light on them, while the fresh scent of earth and grass lingered in the air. Ananda sat respectfully beside the Buddha, his brow slightly furrowed and his gaze full of questions. He looked up and asked, "Teacher, you often speak of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas as embodiments of compassion, guiding all beings across the sea of suffering. Yet why do so many in the world still struggle in hardship? If the Buddha and Bodhisattvas truly possess limitless power, why don't they simply appear in person and rescue everyone from their suffering?" The Buddha smiled gently, his eyes kind and profound, as though they could see into Ananda's every thought. He spoke slowly. "Ananda, your question is important. You feel compassion for the suffering of others, which shows a good root of empathy in your heart. Still, the way the Buddha and Bodhisattvas save beings is not as straightforward as you imagine. People's suffering arises from ignorance and karma, so the Buddha and Bodhisattvas must wait for the right conditions to be met before liberation can occur." Hearing this, Ananda grew even more perplexed. "Teacher, if the Buddha and Bodhisattvas truly have infinite compassion, why not simply manifest great miracles and remove everyone's suffering? Is there really a situation where even they cannot help?" The Buddha slowly shook his head, gently yet firmly. "Ananda, their compassion is boundless, but people's karma is vast like an ocean. Yes, the Buddha and Bodhisattvas can show the way, but they cannot row the boat for all. If someone refuses to extend a hand, how could the Buddha and Bodhisattvas pull that person ashore?" Ananda bowed his head in thought, then asked again, "Teacher, in that case, how can people receive the salvation of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas? Does it mean only those who have a special connection can be saved?" The Buddha nodded. "Ananda, you have touched on the key point. Indeed, receiving guidance depends on having the right connection. As the saying goes, even the vast sky cannot water a plant with no roots. Even the expansive gates of the Dharma cannot admit those with no affinity. Though the Buddha and Bodhisattvas wish to deliver all, if someone has neither faith nor openness, even if the Buddha and Bodhisattvas appear before them, they cannot truly help." Ananda reflected on this. "Teacher, how does one create that connection with the Buddha and Bodhisattvas? How can we invite their salvation into our lives?" A soft smile lit the Buddha's face, revealing a gentle wisdom. "Ananda, creating a connection is not difficult. One needs a benevolent heart, a commitment to sowing good deeds, and sincere effort in practice. When you cultivate these qualities, you align yourself with the Buddha and Bodhisattvas. They are always near, but beings often fail to see or hear them. Today, let me share the profound truth of how the Buddha and Bodhisattvas save others, so you may understand it clearly." Hearing this, Ananda grew joyful and bowed respectfully. "Teacher, please offer your compassionate guidance. I am ready to listen." The Buddha inclined his head and began. "Ananda, pay close attention. The Buddha and Bodhisattvas extend their help like sunlight shining on the earth, present everywhere, or like a clear spring flowing silently, nourishing all. However, if people shut themselves away and refuse to receive it, that compassion cannot manifest. Next, I will tell you some stories to help you grasp this truth more deeply." Ananda nodded in reverence, his heart brimming with anticipation. He knew that the Buddha's teachings would clear his doubts and lead him toward deeper awakening. The Buddha briefly closed his eyes and then opened them again. Speaking slowly, he continued, "Ananda, I will begin with a story that illustrates the essential prerequisite for receiving the Buddha and Bodhisattva's help." Ananda straightened his posture and listened intently. The Buddha went on. "Long ago, there was an elderly woman who believed she had deep faith in the Buddha. Every day she chanted the Buddha's name and recited sutras, harboring great reverence for the Buddha and Bodhisattvas. One day a sudden flood hit her village. The rising waters quickly submerged houses and fields. Trapped on the roof of her home, surrounded by rushing waters, she became terrified and prayed to Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara for help. 'I have chanted faithfully all these years. Please, Bodhisattva, save me from this disaster.' Compassionate Avalokiteshvara heard her pleas. Soon a young man paddled a small raft to where she was and called out, "Ma'am, the water's only getting higher. Climb onto my raft and I'll take you to safety." The old woman looked at the young man, then at the simple raft, and shook her head. "That raft is too small. It doesn't look safe. I'm waiting for Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara to rescue me. You go on ahead." The young man had no choice but to leave. Ananda furrowed his brow, looking troubled. "Teacher, wasn't that young man a manifestation of Avalokiteshvara?" The Buddha nodded. "Indeed. But the old woman was so attached to her idea of how the Bodhisattva should appear, glorious and radiant, that she failed to realize he was already there, in the form of an ordinary person." Ananda fell silent, letting the Buddha continue. Before long, a middle-aged man arrived in a small wooden boat. Seeing the situation, he called out, "Ma'am, the current is getting stronger. Climb onto my boat. I'll take you somewhere safe." The old woman again shook her head. "Please go. I'm waiting for Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara to rescue me." The middle-aged man sighed and left as well. The Buddha paused, his expression meaningful. "Ananda, that middle-aged man was another manifestation of Avalokiteshvara. Yet the old woman remained stubbornly fixated on her expectations and rejected the help again." Ananda sighed sadly. "She let her chance slip by twice. That's truly unfortunate." The Buddha gave a small nod. Indeed, and two more groups came to assist her. Both times she refused for the same reason. Finally, just before the water reached her rooftop, an elderly monk arrived with a larger boat. Without waiting for her to object, he pulled her aboard. The house collapsed beneath the flood the moment she was rescued. Ananda relaxed slightly. "Teacher, so that elderly monk was also Avalokiteshvara?" The Buddha smiled. "Yes. Once she was on the boat, however, the old woman complained, 'I've believed in the Buddha for so long. How could Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara fail to appear when I was in danger?' The monk replied, 'Before I came, the Bodhisattva already appeared as the young man, the middle-aged man, and others who tried to save you. You turned them all away. And now that I've rescued you, you still lament that the Bodhisattva didn't come. How can that be?' Ananda seemed to realize something profound. "Teacher, now I see. The Buddha and Bodhisattvas are always by our side, but we often miss their help because of our stubbornness and ignorance." The Buddha nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Their compassion is like sunlight shining everywhere, or clear water quietly nourishing life. But if people close their minds or lack the proper connection, even when the Buddha and Bodhisattvas appear, they cannot offer true help. This is the principle of no crossing without a connection." Ananda bowed deeply. "Teacher, I understand. The help of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas requires our willingness. Without it, we're like rootless grass, unable to absorb their benevolence." The Buddha smiled. "Well said, Ananda. Recognizing this is true wisdom. Having absorbed the teaching about how no crossing occurs without a connection." Ananda felt his heart open wide, yet one lingering question remained. He asked respectfully, "Teacher, if people willingly embrace help from the Buddha and Bodhisattvas, can they then completely change their fate and avoid all suffering?" The Buddha's gaze grew solemn, as though he could sense Ananda's deeper concern. "Ananda, your question touches on another important law in the Dharma, cause and effect. The Buddha and Bodhisattvas, with all their mercy and miraculous powers, cannot simply erase the karma beings themselves have created. That is the principle of karmic law remains unaltered." Ananda furrowed his brow. "Teacher, is cause and effect really so strong that even the Buddha and Bodhisattvas can't undo it?" The Buddha nodded gently, yet resolutely. "Ananda, karma is a fundamental law of the universe, like the link between a seed and its fruit. When people plant certain causes, they will inevitably reap corresponding results. The Buddha and Bodhisattvas can show others how to plant good causes, but cannot bear the negative consequences on their behalf. Let me tell you a story, so you can understand." The Buddha continued, "In my lifetime, there was a heartbreaking event. King Virudaka led his army to attack Kapilavastu, intending to massacre the Shakya clan. Upon learning this, I was deeply disturbed and went to see him 3 times, urging him to abandon his hatred and end the violence. Though I spoke from a place of compassion, His resentment ran too deep. In the end, he invaded Kapilavastu and carried out a brutal slaughter. Ananda's eyes were filled with sorrow. Teacher, could even your supernatural powers not save the Shakya people? The Buddha explained, Ananda, even my disciple Venerable Maudgalyayana, who possessed extraordinary abilities, tried to save 500 members of the Shakya clan. He placed them in his alms bowl and carried them to safety. After King Virudaka's forces withdrew, he removed the lid from the bowl, only to find that all inside had turned to blood. Shaken, Ananda asked, Teacher, why did that happen? Are miraculous powers powerless before karma? The Buddha nodded. Exactly. This is the truth that even great supernatural abilities cannot override karmic momentum, and even the power of the Buddha cannot violate cause and effect. I explained to Maudgalyayana that this calamity stemmed from the Shakya clan's actions in a previous life. Ananda grew curious. Teacher, what had they done to incur such severe retribution? The Buddha replied, a long time ago, villagers in a certain place drained a fish pond during the dry season and cruelly killed all the fish, chopping them into pieces. Every villager participated in this act, except for one child who merely struck a large fish on the head with a stick out of mischief. Ananda listened intently. Teacher, how does that connect to the disaster that befell the Shakya clan? The Buddha continued, those villagers were the past lives of the Shakya people. The fish they killed were reborn as King Virudaka and his army. Having been reborn in human form, they returned to settle the karmic debt. The child who tapped the fish's head was my past life. That is why, when the slaughter occurred, even I could not change the Shakya's fate. In fact, the karma from my past involvement caused me to suffer 3 days of headaches. Ananda was astonished. Teacher, so cause and effect runs so deep that even you couldn't avert it. The Buddha offered a compassionate gaze. Ananda, karma is the result of one's own deeds. The Buddha and Bodhisattvas can teach us how to avoid negative causes and cultivate positive ones, but they cannot endure the consequences on our behalf. This is the meaning of all phenomena may be empty, yet karma is never lost. Ananda mulled this over, then asked, Teacher, what can we do to avoid negative outcomes and reap positive rewards? The Buddha answered with a warm smile. Ananda, if you want to change your destiny, you must start at the level of causes. Observing moral conduct, doing good deeds, building wholesome connections, and practicing diligently are ways to sow beneficial seeds. Only through these can you gradually overcome harmful karma, gather merit, and ultimately find freedom from suffering. Ananda bowed with respect. Teacher, I see now that we cannot defy cause and effect, but through practice we can shape the future's causes and results. That is the essential point of the Buddha's teachings. Nodding, the Buddha replied, well said, Ananda. Understanding this is true wisdom. Though Ananda now grasped the law of cause and effect, he still had a lingering doubt. He asked once more, Teacher, if cause and effect cannot be changed, and the Buddha and Bodhisattvas cannot alter a being's karma, how can we truly connect with them and receive their help? The Buddha gazed at him with a slight smile. Ananda, that is a worthy question. The Buddha and Bodhisattva's saving grace is like sunlight spreading across the land or a flowing spring silently nourishing all. Nevertheless, if people wish to truly receive that grace, they must actively align themselves with the Buddha and Bodhisattvas. This is each person's own responsibility. Ananda nodded thoughtfully. Teacher, how do we align ourselves? Is reciting the Buddha's name and chanting sutras daily enough to receive salvation? The Buddha shook his head, kindly but meaningfully. Ananda, chanting and recitation are valuable, yet they are outer forms of practice. Real alignment comes when the mind resonates with the Buddha and Bodhisattvas. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine someone has fallen into a deep pit. It's dark and steep, making escape very difficult. Someone outside the pit lowers a rope and calls, "Grab hold and I'll pull you up." But the person inside neither reaches out nor responds. Ananda, how can anyone rescue that person then? The Buddha and Bodhisattvas offer us a lifeline. But if people don't reach for it, how can they be pulled out of suffering? Ananda saw the truth of it. Teacher, The Buddha and Bodhisattvas can only help when we take the initiative to receive it. If we have no faith, no aspiration, and no action, we can't be saved, even if they stand right before us. The Buddha nodded. Yes, exactly. Here's another story to illustrate this more deeply. Once there was a poor farmer who toiled endlessly, yet remained in poverty. He heard of Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara's great compassion and prayed devoutly every day, hoping to be relieved of his suffering. Despite his years of faith, his life did not improve. One day he grew frustrated. I've prayed so sincerely, so why isn't the Bodhisattva helping me? That night, Avalokiteshvara appeared to him in a dream. I have already prepared a way for you to find prosperity, yet you've ignored it. When he awoke, the farmer felt puzzled, so he went searching around his property. Eventually, he discovered a fertile patch of land behind his home, overgrown with weeds and left unused for years. Enlightened by this, he started to cultivate that plot. Soon he reaped abundant harvests, and his life grew increasingly comfortable. Ananda reflected on the tale. Teacher, so the Buddha and Bodhisattvas truly do give us a path, but we often fail to notice it, or we let laziness or ignorance stop us from making use of what's already there. The Buddha smiled. Exactly. Their compassion doesn't typically take the form of handing us wealth or comfort directly. Rather, they guide us, show us possibilities, and create opportunities. But if we won't seize those opportunities or make an effort, their presence alone won't alter our destiny. Ananda bowed. Teacher, what must we do to align ourselves with the Buddha and Bodhisattvas and benefit from their support? The Buddha replied, Ananda, alignment begins in the heart. First, nurture kindness and foster goodwill. The Buddha and Bodhisattvas embody compassion and wisdom. If our hearts are clouded with greed, anger, or delusion, how can we harmonize with them? Next, cultivate moral discipline and do good deeds. Through chanting, sutra recitation, and meditation, we purify our minds and accumulate merit. Lastly, cultivate the aspiration to help all beings find freedom from suffering. With this aspiration, our hearts resonate with theirs. Then we truly connect and receive their blessings. Ananda brought his hands together in reverence. Teacher, I understand. Aligning with the Buddha and Bodhisattvas isn't just about outward practice. It requires an inner shift. We need to seize their offer of help, practice earnestly, and establish wholesome connections if we want genuine liberation. The Buddha nodded approvingly. Remember, their compassion is everywhere, but our own responsibility is equally vital. Only by joining our sincere efforts with their guidance can we experience their blessings and journey toward awakening. Deep gratitude filled Ananda's heart. Teacher, thank you for your compassionate teachings. I will practice diligently and strive to honor your guidance. The Buddha offered a gentle smile, his gaze full of love and hope. A soft breeze passed through the grove at Jetavana, bringing a quiet peace, as though all of nature was rejoicing in Ananda's insight.